A wise man can learn more from a foolish question than a fool can from a wise answer.
Bingo.
Capital is what makes the world go round, not money. Capital is anything that you produce, a good or a service. In the investment industry, there's a temptation to try and impress people rather than help them with their business. Millions of young Canadians, Australians, and Americans can't even dream of having the same sort of lifestyle that people my age had, despite the fact that generally they're better educated than me.
And the big question that comes up for me in all of this is, welcome back, everybody, to Flipping the Lid. You know what we do here by now, and I love to have conversations with real people who have had real influence and real impact in this world. Today's guest, I had the brief chance to have on my other show, and though I don't know a lot about him, the way that he navigated the conversation, the authenticity, the realness, the accessibility really made me want to go deeper with him. You know, he's somebody that has been a professional investor for a very long time and runs a capital management company called Paddington Capital Management. But there's so much more to this man, and it was very obvious in the time that we spent together. And so I'm looking forward to diving in and exploring all of who he is as a bird watcher, a cyclist, a man, and somebody who also really puts value and pays attention to other people and the importance of the connecting with other people and putting faith in other people to maintain their ability. And so, Paul Musson, man, I am so grateful to have you here today and to just get to explore and evolve and unpack your story, my friend.
Well, thank you, Brian. I really enjoyed our previous conversation, albeit a short one. And so I'm really looking forward to this.
Cool. Well, I am as well. And, you know, you'll remember this from our other conversation. The only question that I ask every guest on both shows, in fact, outside of however I've introduced you and the little bit I've said about you in this time, who are you in your words?
Yeah. So, as you said, I was a professional investor for my career, but throughout my career, I became more focused on the importance of clear communication and the how good it felt to help people with the discovery of truth. And in the investment industry, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of great people in the investment industry, but there's a temptation to try and impress people rather than help them with their business. And I used to do the same thing when I was doing presentations. I thought if I used big words and I sounded smart, that you know, the clients might not exactly know what I do and how I do it and what to expect from me, but they might think I'm smart. And so they'll give me their money to manage and, you know, I'll get the sale. And, I started tripping over myself and getting caught in little white lies. And it was embarrassing and it was just the wrong thing to do. And so I decided that I'm not doing that anymore. And I'm just going to give people, yes, the unvarnished truth, but not brutal truth. I think about it in terms of intellectual honesty. How can I communicate my truth, or my understanding at least, in a way that someone else will be open to receiving it, or at least considering it? So, like creating a safe environment. And it's not just a safe environment between two people. You can create a safe environment on stage with 500 people in the audience.
Yes.
And so that communication, both oral and written in my quarterly reports, became such an important part of who I was and am. And thus I ended up leaving my employer, who I loved. I had a great job, great team, because I was writing a book and I wasn't having enough time. It's tough to find time to write a book. It's hard to find time to read one, never mind write one.
Yeah.
And so I wrote my book, and I have a blog, a weekly blog, which is free, which I help people to understand what's going on in the world and sort of read between the lines and decipher the sensationalist headlines that you often see in the press. So that's who I am, where I am.
You know, in some respects, if I wasn't listening, I could have just cheekily challenged you back and said, great, I asked you to tell me who you were, but you told me about what you do. And yet the nuance of what you just said really is a lot about who you are, because it is about communication, connection, truth, and your ventures and attempts to find that for yourself and bring that into the world for others. You know, I have to share with you just briefly, because sometimes the world and the universe works in ways that are just magical. In fact, often if we're allowing it, it does. Mm-hmm. But today, I in the last 4 months changed the way I record my long form shows. From having random days and times that I was doing interviews to I batch them and do them twice a month. 2 days a month, I do this, which means I'm in interviews almost all day. The reason I share this with you is because so far this morning, there have been 2 interviews that I've had back to back right before you. And the first one is an expert communicator who helps people actually connect and understand how to overcome difficult, diffusing, or, divisive type conversations. And the last is a man that spent 50 years on Wall Street, is a very well-known and respected name in that space, and yet today is focusing all of his energy around communication and helping people communicate with themselves to get clear on who they are so they can build a life, not just build a living, because of what our educational system does. Yeah. The reason I share all this is your answer just brought together the beauty of both conversations in such a nuanced and cool way that I feel like the universe is just flowing for us to have a great dialogue today. There's so really much in what you said that I'm looking forward to unpacking. And thank you for letting me have that little ADD moment of sharing with you what my day was. Because now I'm like, man, of course, this is a beautiful way to bring it all together in an interview with you. Again, using your words, your truth to make it accessible to others. I love how you answered that question. And the big question that comes up for me in all of this is truth. I speak about truth a lot, and I do believe that the old adage is real, right? Like everything we want is just on the other side of truth. The truth really will set us free. Mm-hmm. But where it comes down to the world that we live in today is people could argue 2 different points as if they are both true, and yet they're 2 completely different ways of looking at maybe the same issue, or they're not even coherent facts.
Yeah.
How, in your time in doing this through your communications, your quarterly reports, the way you communicate with others, how have you found the way to surface your truth as well as to surface what we might call universal truth?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. You know, before I answer, I'll just say one of my favorite sayings, which I quote in my book, is, if you always tell the truth, you never have to remember what you said. And I've been on this intellectually honest journey for quite some time. But it's not a straight line. And, sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And sometimes I only started becoming more honest because, I was getting embarrassed, like I said earlier, getting caught in little white lies. I'd leave something out and then contradicting myself. And so I started really for the wrong reasons. And then it felt so good. And I saw the impact it had. I said, well, this is just the way to be. But my truth, I think, comes from a place of, I never want to kid myself. I always want to, face the music. I can't remember if we talked about it last time, but my journey on intellectual honesty really started when I was having an argument with a girlfriend on the porch back in 1984. And I was very good at arguing, not good at truth, but I just wanted to win. I didn't care about the truth. I wanted to win the argument. And I could counter anything my girlfriend would say, or just about. And finally she said, just stop. I'm not arguing with you anymore. I cannot beat you in an argument, but I know I'm right. And I was thinking to myself, I know you're right too, but I couldn't tell her. Now, obviously that relationship didn't last very long. And I didn't have many friends back then because of this. And I just remember walking back in the house after that. I thought, I've got to change. Like, I somehow have to change. And I was argumentative, I think, because I was so embarrassed about a lot of my own weaknesses and insecurities and stuff like that. So I would deny them and fight them. And so I decided, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to be brutally honest with who I am, no matter how painful it is, and not be embarrassed about it. and then ask myself why I feel that way. And is it okay? Is it not okay? I don't know, but that's how I feel. So if I don't like it, how can I not feel so bad next time or to that degree or whatever? So it's a lifelong journey, of course. And so not living in denial and trying to see things as they are rather than as I would wish them to be. And because over the years, I've seen a lot of people believe in things that, because they wanted to believe it, not necessarily because that's the way it was. It was too painful. And so over the years, I trained myself to not really accept the pain, but over the years, it just became less painful accepting whatever truth was coming at me because I've had a lot of practice at it. And this was before I became an investor. This was before I started studying economics. And so I think in economics, which, we can talk about, my book is really about helping people understand the truth about what's really going on. And the laws of economics can be very inconvenient. And so economics is I'm going off a little tangent here, but it's related.
We're going exactly where we need to go, my friend.
Okay,
just keep going.
Okay, good. So, economics is not a natural science like chemistry or physics where you can have controlled experiments and control all the variables. No, it's a social science like psychology. It's about human actions. And so there are a number of different schools of thought about what makes an economy work. And so because of this, it's subject or at risk of what's called normative economics. So it's economic laws, not as they are, but as you want them to be, to justify your actions. And then when you point out, well, no, that's wrong. Here are the real laws of economics. People get angry at you. And some economists have likened this to getting angry at the law of gravity.
Yeah.
Well, there's no point in getting angry at the law of gravity and then blaming gravity for plane crashes.
Right.
Stupid gravity. Right. No, it's just the law of gravity. So
or just tripping and falling over.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So how do we deal with it? And protect ourselves against it and stuff like that. So that's my truth, is being brutally and because I've had so much practice at it, I know that a lot of people around me have not maybe gone down the same journey to the same degree and are not ready to hear that truth in the same way, in the same words or whatever. And so, years ago, I started, especially my quarterly reports and presentations, trying to say things in different ways and putting myself in somebody else's shoes. If I say this, are they going to just close up? Are they going to be angry? So how can I make them relaxed and make them understand or believe that this is not a threat to them? I just want them to understand and not tell them what to do, to understand. They're all grown up people. They're very smart people. Now, with this truth, you can decide what it is you want to do, what's in your own best interest or what's in your client's best interest, what's best for your business. But you're arming people with truth, and it's extremely powerful. And I love helping people. I love seeing people succeed and I don't need thanks. I mean, it's nice, but I'll give you one more anecdote. This was before the intellectually honest watershed moment in 1984 on the porch. So in the 70s, we used to have at our house, I've got an older sister and a younger brother, and we used to get the bags of milk, like there's 3 bags or whatever. And it was like a contest in our house that when the container was almost empty, you didn't fully empty it, so you didn't have to change the bag. And then the next person who comes, there's like this much milk left for your cornflakes or whatever. I got to change the bag. And it was ridiculous. It was going on for ages, and it was became a game, I guess. I said, I'm not doing this anymore. And so when the bag was really just this much left, I would take the bag out, put a fresh one in, cut the thing with the scissors, and leave the one, the little bit left beside it. So whoever came next didn't have to change the bag. And I didn't tell anybody I was doing it. And I didn't want any thanks. I just said, why am I burdening people? It's just a small thing. Yeah. I'm not going to do that anymore. And it felt really good, you know?
By the way, there's so much in that answer that I want to unpack. And I doubt that I'm even going to be able to remember each component that came up through the course of it. But even what you just said, it's like walking by and throwing something in the trash can and realizing it's full. And instead of taking the bag out, it's just pushing it down.
Yes.
Right. It's the same dynamic that you just discussed with this milk situation.
Yeah.
And, you know, ironically, and I made you a promise before we started the show. And so I'm only going to bring this up as an anecdote because I think it's actually really interesting. And you and I know are aligned. You know, you give this, what you call watershed moment, this moment of like, and now all of a sudden I'm standing in this intellectual honesty from this porch moment. And yet you knew she was right. You just couldn't admit that she was right.
Exactly.
Right. And then the way that you described economics, even through the lens of it's not a traditional science because it factors in human and the social component, which is everything. Right. And I even appreciate how you talked about the rule or law of gravity and how that gets played out. And so here's what I think is interesting. When I asked you before the show if there was anything off limits, your answer was this. I don't typically talk politics. Okay. And what I tell you, I typically don't like to talk politics or religion either. But here's the funny part. It's for the exact same reason that you don't like to, clearly. It's because even if you have the chance to communicate something, somebody is so set in their stance, their belief, even if the law and all science supports something otherwise, people sometimes are so firm in their stance or their belief because of what they're protecting, defending, justifying, or for whatever reason, that there's no ability to actually have that discussion. And what you discussed is, I would test, when I say this, does somebody's armor go up? Do they feel threat? Do they feel fear? And the truth of the matter is, when we're in a position where we have to justify, protect, or defend anything about ourselves or the stance that we have, we're immediately carrying armor. And therefore, everything that we hear is going to be received as threat.
Yeah.
And so what your recognition is that unless I'm with somebody that can have a real conversation, that we can discern and communicate and dialogue, we're not going to debate and argue, which is coming from a place of statement, but you do seem to have the desire to have inquiry and evaluation and conversation and exploration and perspective sharing.
Yeah.
And so the only reason I brought that up is because I love that the one thing you said you don't want to talk about is also directly connected to your lessons and learning in the disconnection that you and other people can have if we're coming in with armor, bias, or the need to be right.
Yeah.
Versus the need to surface truth for ourselves or universally. Did I summarize that accurately?
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
So we're on the same page. I just had to bring that full circle because I loved that. And I loved even the way that you were able to navigate through that. Now, that watershed moment into intellectual truth, what you also said is, I didn't want to admit it to her because of all the areas that I was insecure, I was protecting, I was justifying because of whatever had happened up into your life up until that point. This became a moment of clarity that you wanted to step into ownership and speak as much of your truth as you could and as you were consciously aware of in that moment moving forward.
Yeah.
Take us to the part of your life before that moment. What happened early on that created some of these areas of insecurity or needs to defend or justify that gave you this fight and need to be right instead of need to stand in truth?
I really don't know the answer. I mean, I definitely had anxiety growing up and I still have it, but to much lesser degree. And yeah, for instance, when we moved in 1972 to a new home, I would have been 10. Like I was born in 61, but the end of 61. And it took me months to leave the house. My younger brother, 3 years younger than me, on the first day, he was having lunch at a new friend's house across the street.
Oh.
So very different. He's just very outgoing and And I really admire that about him and a lot of my friends. But I couldn't. And yeah, for many, many years, terrified of people, but I don't know why.
So, by the way, I'm not going to go deeper on that for the time being, just because I know we have a limited amount of time, but some stuff surfaced for me. And if it becomes relevant in this conversation or afterwards, I'll share it with you.
Okay.
Not that the why matters as much as it would in terms of your ability to connect and understand some of those pieces. It's pretty interesting though, because the anxiety and the social component, would it be fair to say that earlier in life, some of this anxiety potentially came from a consistent pattern of not feeling seen and understood in who you were or what you were expressing, which therefore caused you to maybe not put yourself out there as much?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I was definitely embarrassed when I was younger about my feelings. Like, would not demonstrate sadness or want. Happiness, yes, but not weakness, perceived weakness.
Yeah.
For sure.
And if you look back, again, not to spend too much time on this, but most of those things are conditioned environmentally, right? Right, wrong, or indifferent. And it's not to place blame, but just that's also what the world teaches us. The world teaches us to show up, put a smile on, be tough, push through, perform. And I would suggest in particular in the 60s, with less emotional development in our world, less understanding, less forgiveness, it even was more that way than it is today, or even when I was a kid, right?
Yeah.
So are you aware of any factors that caused you to have that set of beliefs that you're able to speak about? Like, I can't express my feelings. Do you have any connection to why you felt that way?
Yeah, no, not really. I don't think so. I mean, and my mom is the exact opposite. Like, expresses the first thing that comes into her emotional being or state or whatever.
Okay.
She has no filter. I mean, my dad does, but yeah, I mean it. So yeah, I'm not really sure. Yeah, and to your point back then, if anything was going on, snap out of it, or that was your prescription,
Yeah, pretty much for everything.
Yeah.
You found your way to start to be able to test and communicate in rooms of people. And you even talked about that. I would find ways of saying something in a different way that might make it accessible to others. If you looked at a generalized way of describing what you learned or what patterns you saw with those tests, the things that would open people versus the things that would shut people down, what were those patterns, understandings, and lessons that you learned in this period of using different language with intention?
I'm not sure I can answer that question. It was like there were not that I can recall anyway, sort of eureka moments where, I would all of a sudden start doing this and everybody would start, clapping. And, I think it was just sort of not iterative, but slowly cumulative over time, getting better, getting more honest, getting more honest feedback from others. And it really does grow. And I was very nervous when I was first doing it. Because you're really, like you do with your podcast, you're putting yourself out there. Mm-hmm. And I didn't like putting myself out there. So I had to fight it. And, but the more you did it and the more, here's one thing. One thing I really discovered, which I didn't expect, was how smart and how great so many other people are. I mean,
I laughed at that statement just because I love that. Expand, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, who'd have thought, like I thought I was smarter, smarter than most people. And because I hardly talked to people, or very few. And, I was arrogant. And that, it just sort of opened my eyes. And and I talk about it in my book as well, and I really do believe this. There are so many smart people in the world. And, we tend to think that we're all above average. We can't all be above average. And the example I've given in the past is, let's say you're on a subway train and there's 10 cars, there's 100 people per car. And all of a sudden the train stops. Okay, everyone out on the platform, we're going to have a contest, each car against the other. So 10 cars competing with each other. And it'll be like, like problem solving or escape room or whatever, all kinds of different things. You are going to be absolutely amazed at how smart all the other people are on your car. The other 99 people who are all just sitting there. Nobody's talking to each other. You're on your way to wherever. You don't know who they are. And they're going to come up with all kinds of answers that you never would have come up with. And you might come up with one or two. Maybe you'll surprise them. And despite that, you're probably not going to win the contest because on the other 9 cars, each of those have 100 smart people too.
Yeah.
And, I started seeing this the more I was doing things and working with people. I said, just amazed. And that, oh my God, I wasted all these years not talking to people, how much more I could have known and, if I had done.
So one of the things that seems to jump out at me, and though you didn't say this, I think I'm maybe interpreting behind the words as well. When you're in a position where you believe that you are the smartest in the room, you're in a position where you're making statements and you're not making inquiries. Mm-hmm. You're in a position where you're preaching, where you aren't asking questions. Exactly. Right? You're in a position where you believe you're the only one with valuable knowledge, and therefore you talk and consume and absorb all the space versus create the opportunity for engagement, which gives you the chance to see other people speak and share their value.
Exactly.
And so though you didn't say it, one of the patterns that emerged for you is this understanding of all of the brilliance that existed in the people in front of you. And so my assumption, and I guess this is where I'm maybe bringing it back full circle, is what was the change you made in your communication that allowed you to receive that and witness that?
Yeah, I have to think about it because I've never thought about it before.
I'm probably asking you questions that you haven't been asked before. So in all fairness, it's okay. Yeah.
No, absolutely. What did I change? Yeah, well, I guess to your point, not making blunt statements. And because particularly in the financial world and the investment industry, it's very easy just to, off the cuff remarks about, velocity of money or the Sharpe ratio and all that kind of stuff. And it sounds impressive, but you're not helping anybody.
Yeah.
And so if those were necessary subjects to talk about, I would first go back and explain what they are. Before I used the word, here's what this means. And I would do charts if necessary. Charts can be a real crutch as well. Mm-hmm. But if necessary, and then make sure that everybody understood what that concept was, why it was important, and then we can have a discussion about it. Then we can have a conversation about it. Another thing I like, there's a quote that I use in my book, and it's from Bruce Lee, the martial arts guy. And he said that a wise man can learn more from a foolish question than a fool can from a wise answer.
Bingo.
And so when I was going to meet with companies, our investment style was to invest in very high quality businesses all over the world. And so by definition, you're meeting with some of the highest quality chief executive officers or chief financial officers in the world.
Yeah.
And there's a temptation to try and impress them with how much you know about their business, right? Because you don't want to sound like an idiot. And so, I used to do that, And then again, I said, I'm not doing this anymore because I just wasted half the meeting trying to impress this person rather than get them to talk about the business. What a moron. Right. And, do my clients deserve that? No. And so I would just ask very simple and very open-ended questions, or at least what sounded simple. I knew what I wanted to get at, but the worst thing you can do with a very smart person who's running a business is ask a leading question, because you're going to get exactly the answer you want to hear.
Yep.
And they're going to know you want to hear it.
Yep.
And again, you've just wasted an hour. You're not getting truth. Not that they're bad people, don't get me wrong, or they're not lying, but we're not really getting to the heart of, should we invest in this business or remain invested in this business because we have confidence in the long-term sustainability of the competitive advantage, which is a result of the great corporate culture that this company has. So let me find out about that. And it was so much fun.
Well, you just hit on two things that I think are really important, and it hits on one of the topics that I believe in most. I've said for years that I'm only as good as my questions, right? But you hit on two areas of questions that, though I've even done it today, often I ask a caveat or I give a caveat because I hate to ask close-ended questions and I hate to ask leading questions. Right? So meaning if I know no other way to ask it, oftentimes I'll say, I hate to ask closed-ended questions, but I don't know any other way to ask it. This is yes or no, but it leads me somewhere else, right? That I want to understand. But the same thing is true, just like an assumptive close in a sales process, we can ask leading questions that actually embed a bias that take us out from getting truth. And so what you just hit on is your understanding through iteration of being able to understand the types of questions that would give you the answers that would give you the understanding you needed to then take the next action, not to impress, but determine alignment. And so that's, I think, where I'd like to spend a second is how did you learn to craft the simple, relevant, and pointed questions that were not leading, that were not closed, that gave you the information that you needed the most?
Yeah, I think it was just confidence in myself and, not needing to impress. And, and it happened slowly over time. And like the other things I talked about, it became self-reinforcing,
The more you do it, the easier it gets.
Yeah. and also some of the responses I would get where the management team thought they knew what I wanted to hear, but it was the exact opposite, which is great because then I knew that this was not a business for us.
Yeah.
But you could tell because we had a slightly different investment style and very long term. And, we didn't really care about the next quarter or the next 6 months or the next 12 months because with accrual accounting, there's a lot of latitude in accrual accounting. And, and some CFOs, you would say, well, people say, well, what are your earnings per share going to be next quarter? And they'll say, well, what do you want them to be? And they're doing everything perfectly legal. And so anyways, I don't really have a better answer.
No, it's okay. I think it's the perfect answer. It's really getting to the heart of what I was getting at. And it's you being able to determine alignment. And no different, by the way, than the watershed moment of intellectual truth. Your ability to ask better questions and get more truth out of others was also rooted in your own confidence and security in self. Which is still the foundation. Because if you aren't courageous enough to ask the stupid question, to Bruce Lee's whole point, you're not going to get any answer. Right? Or you're going to get an answer that won't give you the truth. I also appreciate that you even just highlighted just a slightly different investment strategy and really focusing on the long term versus the next quarter or the way that we can make the numbers look for a period of time. Where would you say this investment strategy came from and was developed that you guys used? And how did it serve you over the long run in actually aligning with the right organizations?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So the likes of Warren Buffett, he's a long-term investor and some say the greatest investor of all time. And there are others as well. But it's important that you're with an organization that understands why. I mean, there are other investment styles. But if you have a long-term investment style, it's crucial that the organization you work for understands why you invest that way and that they compensate you accordingly, i.e. with long-term performance numbers rather than short-term. And ironically, I think it was Charlie Munger, who was Warren Buffett's right-hand man. He said something like, show me the incentive and I'll tell you the behavior.
It's true.
Right. And so I think a lot more investors, professional investors, would invest and think longer term if their compensation was aligned with that. But a lot of them, if they're not performing in the short term, their bosses get impatient. And because the clients are starting to complain. But the important thing, or one way to get ahead of that, is to make sure that you have managed your clients' expectations clearly. So remember I told you before about telling my clients the truth. I didn't want to tell them at first that, yeah, there might be long periods where we underperform, still going up, still growing, and still getting you closer to your long-term financial goals, but we might not be keeping pace with the market. And so, after I started just telling the truth, I'd explain, yeah, there may be long periods of time when you're not keeping pace, still growing, but here's why we're not keeping pace. It's because we're being more careful. And so when the market does this, we probably will go down, but not nearly as much. That's sort of the plan. And then when it does go down and you don't go down as much, they say, oh, now I get it. So you have to manage the expectations before the things happen.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of work. And you have to manage the expectations of your bosses, so they don't get impatient and fire you right at the wrong time. And yeah.
And again, expectations, by the way, are one of the biggest areas that we can fail, particularly when we don't articulate or find a way to articulate them clearly and early and often, right? Because people will fabricate their expectations, and then you're living into an ambiguous standard that you may not even know how to hit. So I love even how you're bringing it back down to clarity and communication. The title of your book is one that jumped out at me. And I know we talked about this a little bit on the other show, but it supports even the ways that you approach everything, is what it seems like. And the book is called Capital Offence: Why Some Benefit at Your Expense. Where did the title of this book come from? And why was it so important for you to write this book in this way?
Yeah, well, thank you. I like to think I've got a sense of humor. And my wife is the queen of puns. And so there's a lot of puns going back and forth in our house and wordplay and stuff like that. And and we laugh a lot. Like, we laugh a lot in our house. And and so Capital Offence is wordplay. It's not like in the if you commit a crime, it's and we can talk about it. It's how central banks take your capital from you without your permission. I used to say without your knowledge. You know it. You might not know it, but you do know it, in that you probably know it because the things that you want to buy are just getting more and more expensive. That's because your capital is being taken from your money. Capital and money are two different things. And then the why some benefit at your expense part, I wanted, it was already a provocative title with Capital Offence in there. But I also wanted people to see the title, Why Some Benefit at Your Expense. Like, nobody wants anybody else benefiting at your expense. If they're benefiting, you want it because it's voluntary on your part. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of good, about that. And there are a lot of people, well, there's a small percentage of the no, I shouldn't say that. There are a lot of people who are benefiting significantly at the expense of others. And I've been so angry about it. Not at the people, because the people who are benefiting have not done anything wrong. great people, play by all the rules. It's the system that is broken. And the path that we are on is unsustainable. The math doesn't work. And it will end badly if we do not change it ourselves.
Mm.
And so that's why I came up with that title.
Yeah.
Try and grab people and say, let me help you understand what is happening here. Because if we don't do something about it, we could have a controlled implosion, like when they put explosives in a building to bring it down, and it's nice and controlled, it all comes down and nothing around it is. Or if we don't do that, it will be an out of control explosion, and there will be significant collateral damage. And if people think things are bad now and tough now, it could be significantly worse. So I'm very worried about it. And as we were saying earlier, I think people are very smart, and the average person is very smart. And there's a saying that the people always get the government that they deserve.
Mm.
But that's only true, i.e., you voted for them, so, don't complain. Well, it's only true if people actually understand what's going on. And I think a lot of people don't understand what's going on with respect to how an economy works. And this is my main focus in the monetary system. And so the book is written in very easy to understand terms, that intellectually honest communication that you and I have been talking about, to help people understand what's happening, and then arming people with the truth so they can demand better actions from our policymakers, who are also good people. But policymakers today doing the right thing would be political suicide.
Mm.
Right? And so they don't do it. And who can blame them?
Yeah.
And so they'll do it if we demand it of them. But for the last 30 years, we've been demanding something different. We've been demanding more from the government, but the government can only give you more if it takes more from the private sector, because the government doesn't itself produce any capital.
Right.
It can only access capital from the private sector. And there's 3 ways they can do it, which we can talk about. So I've gone on off course here a little bit, but anyways.
No, well, I mean, I want to talk about it a little bit further. What I want to start with, and I by the way, I love wordplay as well. I mean, the whole title of this show, Flipping the Lid, is wordplay.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
most people associate flipping the lid with reacting, getting angry, and yet I'm like, no, flip it open and look inside.
Yeah,
That's what matters, right?
Yeah.
And so I love the specificity, and even through the course of our discussion today, you've even brought things down into a very specific way of defining a word for yourself or for someone else, right? Because with that, we get understanding. Mm-hmm. And so you said something very specific. You said capital and money are not the same thing. Now, again, I believe I know what you mean there, but I don't want to assume.
Yeah.
Could you please define capital as you mean it and intend it as you discuss it, and then define money so that we can understand what you mean when you say capital and money? And then I would like to understand the basics of the monetary system and what it is you believe we can do about it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Brian, for that. Okay. So capital is what makes the world go round, not money. Money is very important, but it's not what makes the world go round. So capital is anything that you produce, a good or a service. So you produce this podcast, and so this is capital that you're producing. And then your listeners will consume that capital. So the example I like to give is, let's say you make bikes, and you make nice bikes. And so you make a bike and you've just created capital. And I make suits. I make nice suits. I've just created a suit. I've just created capital. So if there was no money in the system, we would do what's called direct exchange or barter. Yep. So you would give me your bike. I'd give you my suit. We've exchanged the capital that we created. And importantly, it didn't come at the expense of anybody else. So in the economy, There was no bike and no suit. Through our efforts and investment, we created a bike and a suit, and then we exchanged them. Nobody was coerced, and nobody suffered. That's the way a free market capitalist system is supposed to work, by the way, where any capital you have, any wealth that you have, is supposed to be a reflection of all the capital you've created throughout your career, and then freely exchanged with others for the capital that they created. And so your capital that you have is a reflection of cumulatively out there, the capital that others have. It doesn't come at anybody else. It's not working that way. It still does, but not nearly as much as it should. So you create a bike, I create a suit, but we don't do direct exchange anymore. We have indirect exchange. We use the medium of exchange, which is called money. We use money to exchange all the capital that is being produced in the world. And so you make your bike. Let's say you make 10 bikes, and they're $1,000 each, really nice bikes. You put your $10,000 in your bank account. What that $10,000 effectively represents is the bikes that you created, the capital that you created. That $10,000 is temporarily storing up the 10 bikes that you created. That when you spend that money, and you buy whatever, let's say you buy, I don't know, some furniture or stuff. What gave you the wherewithal to go buy the furniture was the fact that you first created 10 bikes. That gave you the wherewithal to then go shopping. You created capital, and now you're spending your capital, but you're spending it through the money. So now let's say you got $10,000 in your bank account, but before you get a chance to spend it, the central bank, or the Federal Reserve in the US, doubles the money supply. Now, when they create money out of thin air, that's exactly what they do. They don't create any capital to obtain the money. They just create money out of thin air. So that new money has no capital stored up in it. That new money obtains capital as soon as it comes into circulation, because it takes capital from the rest of the money already in circulation, already in existence. So as soon as that newly printed money comes into circulation, it takes 5 of the bikes from your $10,000 and puts it into the newly created money. And so your bank statement says that you still have $10,000 in your bank account, so you're feeling pretty good about yourself. But when you go to spend your $10,000, it'll only purchase half of what it would have done before the central bank doubled the money supply, because your $10,000 now only contains 5 bikes instead of 10. And that's why the book is called Capital Offence, because central banks take your capital from you every time they increase the money supply.
And so if I distill this down to my understanding of timelines, this would be essentially, since money has been digital and we went away from the gold standard, where capital was rooted in the value of the gold that it supported in our money and currency. Is that accurate?
Exactly.
Okay. Again, I asked a closed-ended question that was somewhat stupid, but I wanted to make sure I understood, because it's only since we left the gold standard that truly this extreme distribution and distinguishing factors between capital and money got so diluted, right?
No, exactly. And there were different eras of money and different types of gold standard as things went along. So with the gold
only
standard,
extrapolated more than even what we've just discussed.
Yes. And like in the late 60s, they were still rapidly increasing the money supply. There was a system called Bretton Woods. So without going into detail, because they were abusing their reserve currency status, the United States, I think the French called it the US's exorbitant privilege that they had because they were reserve currency. They were effectively the only country that could increase the money supply. And so they did just that. And so other countries got nervous that the U.S. Federal Reserve was creating more dollars than they had gold. And so France and the U.K. were coming to taking all their U.S. dollars that they were collecting and bringing them over to the US and saying, we want the gold instead. And so the gold reserves were being drained from the United States. And so that's why Nixon took the US off the gold reserve back in August 15th, 1971. And people will say, well, he had no choice. Well, the only reason he had no choice was because the Federal Reserve was increasing the money supply.
Printing money.
Right. Yeah. So they had a choice. Don't increase the money supply or do it much slower.
So we're 50 years into this pattern, right?
Mm-hmm.
And longer than that is what it sounds like because of different ways that we've changed the standard. So what can we do about it today?
So there's good news and bad news. The bad news is that there is no easy way out. There is no painless way out. And I talk about this in my book, the law of holes. Well, the first law or the rule of holes, whatever, the first rule, when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. And so that would be step one. But you can't even stop digging until you believe that the path that we're on is not sustainable. Now, a lot of people, a lot of famous economists and politicians, their whole reputations are tied up in this system continuing and not blowing up. And so it's tough to get people on board because if we do take the necessary steps, which will result in considerable pain, a lot of people are going to be looking for someone to blame. And I don't like, my book is not a book about retribution and at all. Although the first version, I was quite angry when I wrote it, I had to calm down after.
That's fair enough.
Yeah. But
you tempered it. You stepped more into intellectual truth in the second version.
There you go. Yeah. Yes. It's a journey. And, but yeah, so step one is to stop living in denial. Stop trying to convince ourselves that we can have something for nothing. That if you are benefiting from the system without having created the capital to justify that benefit, then your benefit has come at somebody else's expense. Whether it was voluntary or involuntary, or whether they know it or they don't know it, that's just the way it is. And so we have to stop believing in this something for nothing fairy tale. A lot of economists want to believe in this. It's more fun, and you look like a nicer person. This is like back in 1983, Francois Mitterrand, he was the president of France. And he decreased the retirement age from 65 to 60. And so everybody loved him. Thank you. You're such a nice guy. Well, I could argue, hey, I'm a nicer guy. I want people to retire at 30. How do you like that? Well, no, the consequences are 10, 20, 30 years down the road where now the next generation is having to fund the retirement of the one that went before them because people lived beyond their means because this nice president let them do it at the expense of somebody else. Mm-hmm. And so we have to, and not believing in the something for nothing myth, it's easier to do when you actually understand what's going on.
Yeah. And
one of the big examples, and it's a huge issue today, is housing affordability.
Oh yeah. It's huge.
And if you think it's bad for you guys up here in Canada, it's way worse. And it's way worse in Australia. And millions of young Canadians, Australians, and Americans can't even dream of having the same sort of lifestyle that people my age had. I'm 63.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that generally they're better educated than me, work just as hard, just as smart, maybe smarter. Yet I was able to afford a lifestyle that they can't see happening. So why is that? Well, I know why it is. And it's not their fault. And it's not my fault either. even though I'm benefiting from it. So earlier, we talked about how you should only have capital if you create a capital and then fairly exchange it with someone else. So back in 2001, at the urging of a few market commentators, the Federal Reserve, this is my opinion now, decided to create, coming out of the very mild recession in 2001, decided to create a wealth effect by driving housing prices higher. Now, they did this because in the dot-com boom in the 90s, stock markets were soaring. And there's what's called a wealth effect. People's stock portfolio goes higher. They feel wealthier. They spend more of their money. It's good for the economy, or at least they think so. And so it looks like the politicians are doing a great job. Everybody's happy. Tech wreck, stock portfolios go down. People spend less. You get a negative wealth effect. All right, so let's start another positive wealth effect by driving housing prices higher. A wealth effect through rising stocks is a real wealth effect, valuations aside, because companies are producing real capital.
Correct.
And boosting their profit, that pushes the share price up, pushes stock market up. There's real wealth being created. But with a housing market boom,
it's fabricated.
There's no new capital being created. You're just paying more for the same capital. So my house here, or our house here, we're in Mississauga, which is a suburb of Toronto. We bought it in 2001. If we sold it today, we would get 4 times what we paid for it. What was our contribution to society to justify making 4 times on our home? It was 0. Our house is not a productive asset. It's not producing 4 times as much stuff. It hasn't quadrupled in size. It hasn't relocated to a different location. It's the same economic good that a younger couple or a newcomer to our country has to pay 4 times more than we did. And this is a direct result of central bank policy to drive asset prices higher. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't believe it's conspiracy. Some people think, oh, they did this to make the top 1% even richer. I don't believe that at all. I think they actually believed that by driving asset prices higher, so instead of having a strong economy pushing stock markets higher, they thought driving asset prices higher would pull the economy up with it, and that eventually the benefits of all that would trickle down to everybody else. It didn't happen, and it won't happen. And it's a big theme in my book.
Well, I really appreciate the simplicity with which you even discuss all of this. It is interesting to me because you have talked about a lot of laws. We've talked about a lot of universal truth. And what you even just highlighted is kind of the law of unintended consequences.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah, no different than, frankly, what I often teach people as it relates to their own personal journey and understanding themselves and healing and the ways that shows up in their worlds and their businesses and their messaging, right? Like, I can say definitively that things that have shaped who I am, the ways that I believe about myself, the patterns, behaviors, even my shame and my anger came directly tied to certain things in how I was raised. However, what I can also tell you is definitively, no questions asked, my parents always had the best intent in mind.
Yeah.
Right. They always did things with my best interest at heart. They always, and still today, will show up without question to help me because their intent has always been in the right place.
Yeah.
However, what I always say is that the world will never judge us based on our intent. The world is only ever going to judge us based on what our words, actions, and behaviors communicate, or what the residual effect of what those words, actions, and behaviors produce in the world.
Exactly.
Which is a dynamic of what you're discussing right now. Right.
Yeah.
The wealth gap that has taken place in my lifetime. I'm 40 years old. I'm born in 1985. And what's really fascinating about this is you hit on the exact same topic that this 90-year-old brilliant man that if I reference his name, you probably know who he is because he had that type of impact in Wall Street over 50 years. And he talked about how our world doesn't face the same challenges that we once did because since 1983, it's basically been straight up.
Yeah.
However, what you also just discussed is that we're not necessarily having straight up in terms of capital production. We're having straight up as it reflects to money and the production of money in our economy and the ways that we pull those levers in a way that allows that money to have a higher perceived value that isn't backed or tied to any capital, which creates the issues that the youth are facing today, which is the inability to even move out of their parents' homes in their 20s and 30s because they can't afford it. And so I love the simplicity with which you outline each one of these topics, because like I said earlier, everything happens for a reason. And the dynamic of these conversations taking place today brought this to a really cool pinnacle with you in understanding this. I want to go deeper in your book, but I do have to ask a couple of quick questions that aren't related to this as we wrap our interview, because I find it fascinating.
Well, thank you.
As somebody who's deep into economy, who's into intellectual truth, that's into understanding people and these things, where does your interest in bird watching come from?
Well, my dad was a bird watcher, and so it's something we've always done together. I was doing it this morning, actually. It's the fall migration, so you see lots of different birds coming through. It's like my binoculars at the ready when I'm doing my blog in my front office and looking through the window. I don't really know why. I mean, it's very peaceful. I find when I'm bird watching, I don't think about anything. It's one of the few things I don't think about anything else. And I absolutely love nature. I love trees, smells of the forest. And then it's a real challenge trying to identify the birds. And so it's very competitive, like with yourself, not with other people. And something you can do with friends. And it's just, I absolutely love it.
How many birds can you name just by sight?
Yeah, I don't know. Quite a few.
Tens, hundreds?
Oh, yeah. Probably. I'm guessing maybe a couple of hundred, I
love that.
Something like that. Yeah.
I love that.
And then there's bird calls, over the years, you can tell right away what the bird is and stuff like that, which is kind of fun.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole bunch there, and I wish we had more time today. But Paul, I'm really grateful for the discussion and how you showed up and how you are attempting in your own ways to bring truth and access to truth to people so they can do something with it for themselves and for each other. Is there a closing thought you'd like to leave us with today?
Yeah, I think that, we're not on a good path, but I do have great faith in people. And I do believe that most people want to do the right thing, including the policymakers and including those who have made decisions who didn't really think about the second and third order effect consequences of their actions. And I think we're going to get to a better place, but we need to steel ourselves and brace ourselves, because it's not going to be easy. But I think we can do it.
Paul, I really appreciate you. We're going to have links to all of your stuff in our show notes. People will be able to access your free blog, Political Economy. And I love, again, another play on words. I love the wordplay, the intentionality, the humor, and the puns that are wrapped into it. And everybody can find your book, Capital Offence, Why Some Benefit at Your Expense. We'll have all those in the links. But thank you for your truth, for your presence today.
Well, thank you, Brian. I really enjoyed it.
Good. And for those of you that just watched Paul jump in and flip open his lid, he talks about this watershed clarity moment that allowed him to step into intellectual truth. And despite not having the understanding as to why he operated the way he did, from that moment forward, it became a process of refining, of testing, of evaluating what was true for him and how to communicate in a way that would make things true or accessible for others. See, when you can understand the laws that dictate our universe, our society, our population, and to be able to distinguish between science, fact, and justifiable proof versus the human component that allows us to sway things in whichever direction we want, we really can start to have a lot more grace for ourselves and for each other, because it's not about being right. It's not about placing blame, but it is about finding the ability to create acceptance and understanding so that we can make choices and move into the future together. See, the laws of unintended consequences can catch up with each and every one of us. And it's only by asking the right questions, by not leading, by not being closed in that capacity, but to be open-ended and open-minded and open-hearted with ourselves and with each other, that leads to the chance for us to each have the same type of opportunities that decades before us did. Each and every one of these things is true for you, but it will require you to be honest with yourself, to find your own truth. And the only way to do that is to flip open your lid and scan your can. We'll We'll see you next time.
What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible, but to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flipping the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there.